She learned she had been auctioned on a Thursday morning. Not at the auction itself. She had not been present at the auction because the auction had taken place at Whitmore's Gentlemen's Club, which did not admit women. The auction of her marriage prospects had proceeded without her knowledge, her consent, or her presence in a panelled room on Pall Mall, over brandy, with 23 of London's most powerful men in attendance. She learned about it the way one generally learns about such things, too late from someone who assumed she already knew. Lady Pembridge, her godmother, who had been managing Nora Ashfield's London season with the specific precision of a general managing a campaign she expected to win, came into the morning room on a Thursday in March of 1817, with the expression of a woman who has received news she considers both remarkable and practically useful. "My dear," she said, "you will never guess what Wyndham has done." Nora looked up from her embroidery. She had been working on the same section of it for 4 days because she kept stopping to think about other things, which Lady Pembridge had remarked upon with the patient tolerance of a woman who had long since ceased expecting Nora's attention to go where it was directed. "Wyndham," Nora said because she needed to say something. "The Duke of Wyndham," Lady Pembridge confirmed, sitting down with the energy of someone preparing to deliver intelligence. "You know what those dreadful men were doing at Whitmore's last Tuesday? Hartley and his set, auctioning off the season's eligible young women like they were bloodstock at Tattersall's." Nora had heard about this. It had reached the drawing rooms in distorted fragments. The specifics were not something the men involved were publicizing, and the women whose names had been used were not in possession of enough facts to respond accurately. She had heard her own name mentioned in connection with it, and had chosen, with the deliberate economy of someone who has learned that precision matters more than reaction, to wait until she had correct information before feeling anything about it. She was about to have the correct information. "Hartley opened the bidding on you at 50 guineas, Lady Pembridge said. Which was an insult, frankly. But what can you expect from Hartley? Lord Vane bid 80. Sir Charles Lennox bid 90. There were apparently several others involved. I don't have all the names. And it was getting rather spirited, according to what I've heard." Nora put down the embroidery entirely. "And then," Lady Pembridge said, with the quality of someone arriving at the good part, "Wyndham's man arrived. Not Wyndham himself, his man, with a sealed note. Read it aloud. 500 guineas, standing bid, non-negotiable." The room went entirely silent. Nora was silent too. "He wasn't even there," Lady Pembridge said. "He sent a note. 500 guineas and walked every other man out of the room, without being in it." Nora sat with this for a moment. 500 guineas. Not his presence, his proxy. The specific message of a man who considered the matter settled without requiring the formality of attendance. She thought, "I don't know him." She thought, "He doesn't know me." She thought, which of those two things is the more interesting problem? Then she picked up her embroidery, set it aside permanently, she was never going to finish it anyway, and said, "I would like to meet the Duke of Windham. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and like the story to reach others, thank you. And I want you to understand what was done to Nora Ashfield on that Tuesday in March. The auction was not legal. It was not formal. It was not anything the law would have recognized or addressed. It was 23 powerful men treating a woman's marriage prospects as a game, and the social world would not condemn them for it. The thing I want you to hold on to as this story begins is not the outrage of the auction, though the outrage is entirely correct. It is the specific quality of what Nora Ashfield chose to do with the information. She was handed something that had been done to her without her knowledge or consent. What she did next was entirely her own. In Regency England, the marriage market was, functionally, an economic transaction. A woman's worth was calculated from her dowry, her family connections, her social accomplishments, and her personal reputation. The men who gathered in gentlemen's clubs were, in practical terms, already calculating these values informally. Which families were financially sound, which women had the best prospects, which matches would be most strategically advantageous. The auction at Whitmore's was a vulgar and explicit version of what the entire social season was already doing implicitly. The women who were auctioned had no legal recourse and no public mechanism to respond. Their options were to ignore the matter, to be humiliated by it, or, as Nora Ashfield chose, to treat it as information to be used. She gathered what she could about the Duke of Wyndham. His name was Edmund Rowe. He was 33. He had held the dukedom for 5 years, inheriting it at 28 from a father who had apparently spent the better part of his tenure at Wyndham Abbey in Derbyshire and the remainder of his time in London expressing measured opinions in the House of Lords. Edmund had continued this pattern with greater efficiency. He appeared at the correct social events with the correct frequency. He voted in the Lords with the careful precision of someone who had read everything relevant and decided from evidence. He maintained his estates with the attentiveness of someone who considered them a responsibility rather than an inheritance. He was not known for grand gestures. This made the 500 guineas considerably more interesting. Lady Pembridge's network produced the additional information that he had not previously been connected with any woman in particular, that he was not considered cold by those who knew him, but was considered exacting, and that he had, and this detail arrived via Lady Pembridge's conversation with his own cousin, been to Whitmore's on the Tuesday in question for a different purpose, had apparently heard what was happening through the door of an adjacent room, and had sent his note before leaving without speaking to anyone about it. He had not attended the auction. He had heard it through a wall, sent a number that ended it, and gone home. She thought about that for a long time. She had one mechanism by which she could arrange an introduction. Lady Pembridge was acquainted with his aunt, Lady Morwell, who attended the same Thursday morning charitable committee meetings, and who could, with some management, be persuaded to arrange a drawing-room encounter at which both parties would be present. She managed this, she dressed for it, with the specific precision of a woman choosing her ground. Not her most elaborate dress, she was not performing wealth or social aspiration, not her plainest, she was not performing indifference. She chose the dark teal silk that Lady Pembridge called sensible, and Lord Hartley had once remarked upon unfavourably, which meant it was exactly right. She went to Lady Morwell's drawing-room on a Friday afternoon and found among 12 other guests the Duke of Wyndham. He was not what she had expected. She had expected power to be visible in the way that men performed it when they were aware of their own significance. Instead, he was quiet and contained, standing at the edge of the room with a cup of tea and the expression of a man who had attended this drawing-room because he said he would, and was giving it the precise measure of attention he considered appropriate. He saw her come in. She could not have said exactly how she knew that he knew who she was. It was in the quality of his attention, not the sudden performing quality of a man encountering the object of his 500 guinea bid, but the still pre-existing quality of a man who had already accounted for this moment before it arrived. She made her way without obvious purpose to his side of the room. "Your Grace," she said. "Miss Ashfield," he said, "you know my name." "Yes." "I know yours," she said. "I know rather more about you than your name, as it happens." "I imagined so," he said. The equanimity was complete, not performed indifference, actual equanimity. He expected this conversation. He was prepared for it. "I have a question," she said. "I expected you might." "Why?" He looked at her. His eyes were dark, precise, the eyes of someone who was spending a specific quality of attention on the thing in front of them. "I was at Whitmore's for a committee meeting," he said. "The adjacent room was not quiet. I heard what Hartley was doing. I found the matter distasteful. And so you ended it." "I ended it in the most efficient manner available to me, by winning an auction for my hand." A pause. "By removing the entertainment value from an activity I found objectionable," he said. "The bid was not, I want to be clear about this, an expression of romantic intention. It was a statement that the activity should stop." She looked at him. "You bid 500 guineas to make a point," she said. "Yes." "That is a great deal of money for a point." "I had the money," he said. Hartley had to understand that the number was insurmountable. A lower figure would have been challenged. "And you left immediately after." "I had nothing further to do at Whitmore's." She considered all of this. She considered the specific logic of it, the auction as an objectionable activity, the 500 guineas as the most efficient instrument of its termination, the departure without requiring any acknowledgement or thanks, the man who had stopped something without needing credit for the stopping. "You understand," she said carefully, "that by doing this, you have placed yourself in a social position that most people will read as an expression of interest." Yes, he said. I understand that. And yet you did it anyway. The social position is manageable, he said. The auction was not. The drawing room continued around them. 12 people were drinking tea, none of whom were attending this conversation. I see, said Nora Ashfield. She looked at the tea in her own cup. May I ask you something further? Yes. If I were to tell you that I have no interest in being the beneficiary of someone else's moral statement, and that I would prefer to manage my own situation, including the social consequences of your 500 guineas, how would you respond? He was quiet for a moment. It was the genuine quality of quiet, someone actually thinking. I would say that your preference is entirely reasonable, he said, and that I have no intention of requiring your gratitude, your reciprocation, or anything else. The bid was mine to make. The consequences of it are mine to manage. You're very calm about this. I try to be calm about the things I can't change, he said. The bid happened. It can't be unhappened. What can be managed is what follows. She put down her teacup. What follows, she said. That, he said, is entirely up to you. The social consequences of the Whitmore's auction were not distributed equally. The men who had participated faced almost no social penalty. Their names were not publicly known, the event itself was not formally documented, and the social world had no mechanism by which to hold them accountable. The women whose names had been used were in a substantially different position. The auction was known in drawing rooms across London within 3 days, and the knowledge of it attached to the women named in it whether they liked it or not. Nora Ashfield's position was complicated further by the specific addition of the Duke of Wyndham's 500 guinea bid. It simultaneously distinguished her from the other women named at the auction and subjected her to a different form of scrutiny. The assumption that the bid represented genuine romantic interest from a duke and the social pressure that assumption created. The drawing rooms took approximately 5 days to fully absorb the information and begin generating interpretations. The first interpretation: Wyndham was desperately in love with Miss Ashfield and had made a dramatic romantic gesture. This version spread quickly because it was the most interesting and the most legible within the existing social vocabulary of eligible dukes and marriage-aged women. The second interpretation: Wyndham had made a strategic calculation about the social benefit of attaching himself to a woman with Nora's connections, and the auction had simply provided the convenient occasion. This version spread more slowly because it required attributing calculation to a romantic gesture, which the drawing rooms found less satisfying. The third interpretation, which was the accurate one, spread barely at all, because it was too specific and too unflattering to Hartley and his set to be circulated by the people who had attended Whitmore's. Nora's social position, therefore, became immediately both elevated and impossible. Elevated because the Duke of Wyndham's attention was the most valuable social currency available, and it was now publicly attached to her name. Impossible because she was expected, by every social convention governing the behavior of unmarried young women in possession of a duke's declared interest, to be managing toward marriage with him. She had told him that she would manage her own situation. She was discovering that managing one's own situation, when it involved a duke's 500 guineas and 20 drawing rooms full of people who had already decided what the situation meant, was a more complex proposition than she had initially accounted for. Lord Hartley made it worse. He made it worse specifically because he was a man who did not respond gracefully to being outmaneuvered, and who had understood, with the particular accuracy of a man who had done something objectionable, exactly what Wyndham's 500 guineas had communicated about him personally. He appeared at 2 evening parties within a week of the Whitmore's event, and made, in both cases, remarks about Wyndham's bid that were designed to reframe it as foolishness rather than power. The price was extravagant. The gesture was theatrical. A man who had to pay 500 guineas to end an auction could not have been managing his finances sensibly. The remarks reached Wyndham within 48 hours. Wyndham's response was not what Hartley expected. It was not a social confrontation, a public rebuke, or any of the forms of retaliation that Hartley's own social vocabulary contained. It was a letter, private, addressed to Hartley directly, that Nora knew about because Lady Pembridge's housekeeper had a cousin employed in Hartley's house, and the letter had apparently caused its recipient to sit very still for several minutes before putting it away in a locked drawer. No one knew what the letter said, but Hartley did not make further remarks. She thought about this. She thought about the specific choice of a private letter over a public response. She thought about whatever the letter contained that was sufficient to produce silence without requiring witnesses. She thought about the man who had made that choice. She wrote to him. Her letter was brief. It said, "I am aware of the Hartley situation and what you did. I am not asking you to account for it. I am saying that I noticed it, and that I find the method, the private letter over the public statement, consistent with what I understood of you in Lady Morwell's drawing room. I thought you should know that someone noticed it correctly." His reply arrived the following day. It was equally brief. It said, "You notice things precisely. I find this useful. Would you be willing to walk in the park on Thursday morning?" Hyde Park in Regency, London, was the primary venue for the specific social performance of the fashionable promenade. The period between 5 and 7 in the afternoon, when the ton appeared in the park to see and be seen. The morning walk, by contrast, was more private. Fewer attendants, fewer observers, the specific quality of a social encounter that was present but not performed. A man who invited a woman to walk in the morning was not signaling a public romantic display. He was requesting something more like actual conversation, in a setting where actual conversation was more possible. This distinction was not lost on either party. They walked for an hour and 20 minutes. She had not expected an hour and 20 minutes. She had prepared herself for 40, perhaps 50, the polite duration of a walk that was managing social expectations on both sides. He walked without checking the time, and she matched him. He asked her questions. Not the questions that society asked, not her accomplishments, her family's connections, her opinion of the season's fashions. He asked about the book she was reading, which she had mentioned in her letter as an aside. He asked why she found the author persuasive. He asked what she thought the author had missed. She told him. She told him at length, because she had been waiting for someone to ask at length, and because he listened with the specific quality of attention that made length worthwhile, not performing patience, genuinely engaged. He had his own opinion of the author. He disagreed with her on 2 points. He stated the disagreements with the precision of someone who had thought about them and was interested in the response. She responded precisely. He pushed back. She pushed back harder. They were, for approximately 15 minutes, in a genuine intellectual argument about the limits of empirical philosophy, conducted while walking beside the Serpentine at 9 in the morning, in the specific fresh cold of a March morning in London. She could not remember the last time she had been in a genuine intellectual argument. She could not remember the last time anyone had pushed back. "You are not what the drawing rooms have described you as," she said, when the philosophy had settled. "What do the drawing rooms describe me as?" "Cold," she said. "Exacting. Difficult to know." "I am exacting," he said. "Cold is inaccurate." "What is accurate?" He considered. "Selective," he said. "I am selective about the things I spend attention on. The drawing room circuit does not generally reward the quality of attention I am willing to give, so I give it to other things." "Such as?" "The estates, parliamentary work, books, conversations that—" He paused. "Conversations that go somewhere." "This one has gone somewhere," she said. "Yes," he said, "it has." They walked in silence for a moment, the morning park around them, the bare trees beginning their first March green, the path quiet, the city audible at a distance. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Yes." "Did you know anything about me before Tuesday?" He was quiet for one step, two. "I knew your family name. I knew your father died 2 years ago and that your situation is managed through your brother, who I understand is not particularly attentive to it. I knew you had been in London for 2 seasons without any match that your guardian considered adequate. I knew you were considered clever and that this was sometimes noted as a difficulty." She absorbed this. "Considered clever as a difficulty," she said. "Yes." "You researched me." "I researched the situation before making a decision of 500 guineas, he said. "That is simply prudent." "And what did the research tell you?" "That Hartley's set were using you specifically because Hartley is aware that your situation is financially precarious and your brother is unlikely to protect you from social damage. that the auction was designed to be embarrassing because embarrassment would make you more likely to accept a lesser offer in order to resolve the social position, and that this was— He stopped. Objectionable. She was quiet for a moment. You researched them, she said. Not just me. I researched the situation, he said. Yes. Why? Because I was about to spend 500 guineas on it, he said. And because— A pause. Because I wanted to know whether what I heard through the wall was as objectionable as it sounded, or whether I was missing information that would change my assessment. And? It was more objectionable than it sounded. The Serpentine was grey-green in the March morning. The bare trees were beginning something slow and unstoppable. Thank you, she said. She said it simply, without performance, because it was the true thing to say. You told me you didn't want to be the beneficiary of my moral statement, he said. I also told you I noticed it correctly, she said. Those two things are both true. He nodded. Walk on Thursday, he said. Yes, she said. The social complication facing Nora Ashfield in April 1817 was structural rather than personal. The Regency marriage market operated on a precise timeline. A woman who reached her mid-20s without securing a match was considered to be in a declining social position, and the mechanisms that governed acceptable suitors became both more urgent and less favorable over time. Nora's brother, Oliver Ashfield, was her legal guardian in the absence of their father and had, as Edmund had correctly researched, not been actively attentive to her situation. The Whitmore's auction had changed this. Oliver was now aware of his sister's name circulating in a gentleman's club, and this had prompted a level of engagement with her affairs that was, from Nora's perspective, considerably less useful than continued inattention. Her brother arrived in London from his estate in Suffolk on the 6th of April, having received 3 letters about the Whitmore's situation in the preceding 2 weeks and having apparently found the accumulation sufficient to require his personal management. Oliver Ashfield was 29, pleasant enough in his way, and possessed of the specific variety of well-meaning incompetence that produces more problems than deliberate interference. He did not intend to cause difficulty. He simply had no particular skill for avoiding it. He arrived at Lady Pembridge's house, where Nora was staying for the season, and had, within the space of an afternoon, managed to communicate to Lady Pembridge that he was personally offended by the Whitmore's situation on grounds that had more to do with his own dignity than his sister's. Indicate to 3 separate social acquaintances that he considered the matter in hand and would be taking steps, and inform Nora directly that he had made an appointment to call on the Duke of Windham on Thursday morning. You've cancelled my walk, she said. I've arranged a meeting with Windham, Oliver said, with the expression of a man who considers this the same thing. It's entirely appropriate. He made a public bid on your hand. I'm your guardian. I should speak with him. He explicitly stated the bid was not a romantic gesture, she said. He bid 500 guineas, Oliver said. That is a romantic gesture, whether he calls it one or not. If you are enjoying this story so far, please subscribe to this channel and like the story to reach others. Thank you. She thought about arguing further and decided against it. Oliver was not going to hear her. He had arrived in London with a version of events and a plan, and he was going to execute the plan. She could not stop him from seeing Windham. She could manage what Windham knew about the situation before Oliver arrived. She wrote that evening. Her letter said, My brother has arrived and arranged a meeting with you for Thursday morning. I want you to know that I did not request this and do not endorse it. He is well-meaning and somewhat blunt. He will probably say things about obligations and financial arrangements. You are not under any obligation. I apologize for the intrusion. His reply arrived the following morning. It said, Don't apologize. I will manage your brother. Come to the park on Friday instead. She never learned exactly what passed between them in that Thursday meeting. What she knew was that Oliver came back from it quieter than he had been going in, and that he did not subsequently make any further references to obligations or financial arrangements, and that when she asked him what Windham had said, he responded, He's very direct. Yes, she said, he is. He said, Oliver stopped. He said that your situation was one that you had been managing without assistance, and that he had every expectation of you continuing to manage it, and that any discussion of formal arrangements would be conducted through you directly and not through any intermediary. She absorbed this. He said that, she said, more or less. Through me directly. Those were his words. She sat with it. The specific quality of a man who had attended her brother's meeting and redirected it toward her agency rather than his own interest. Who had told her guardian, in so many words, that she was the principal party and would remain so. She thought, he researched the situation before acting. He made the bid without being there. He managed Hartley with a private letter. He managed Oliver by telling him it wasn't his conversation to have. She thought, this is a man with a very specific way of doing things. She thought, I would very much like to know what else he has done that I don't know about yet. The country estate visit in Regency, England occupied a precise social function. It was the context in which a potential match moved from the public performance of the London season to something more private and therefore more revealing. A woman invited to a country house, in a party with appropriate companions, under the supervision of a married hostess, was being offered the opportunity to see a man in his actual context. How he managed his household, how he treated his dependents, what his values looked like in practice, rather than in the managed social surface of London drawing rooms. A country estate in Regency, England, was not merely property, it was an expression of character. The invitation came through Lady Morwell, a party of 8 to Wyndham Abbey in Derbyshire for a fortnight in late April. Lady Morwell herself would be present as the married hostess. Nora's presence was included in terms that gave it the appearance of a general social invitation while making entirely clear to anyone paying attention that it was not general. She accepted. She told Lady Pembridge she was going to assess the situation. Lady Pembridge said that was an excellent way of describing it and asked her to report faithfully. Wyndham Abbey was not what she had expected. She had expected the specific quality of a large estate managed for impression. The showcase of grounds, the deliberately staged grandeur, the property presenting itself as its most compelling argument. Instead, she found a house that was large and well-maintained and entirely occupied with being useful. The farms were working farms. The tenants were apparently known to Edmund by name. She saw him speak to 3 of them in the first day, the conversation specific and substantive. The house itself was grand, but not performing grandeur. It was the house of someone who lived in it, which was subtly but absolutely different from the house of someone who occupied it for social purposes. He was different here, not a different person. He was entirely recognizable as the man from the park, but more present. In London he was contained, precise, the careful attending to social obligation. Here he walked the estate at 6 in the morning because he found it useful to walk the estate at 6 in the morning, and he knew where the drainage on the south field was causing problems and what the factor had proposed and why he disagreed with the proposal. He brought her on the walk on the 3rd morning with the specific quality of someone who has decided that showing her this is not separate from showing her himself. You do this every morning, she said. They were standing at the edge of the problem south field. It was 6:30 and the April morning was cold and she had put on the heaviest coat she had brought. Most mornings, he said. I was at Parliament for 3 weeks in February. The factor sent reports. You trust your factor? To a point. I trust him on the things he's better informed about than I am, and I don't trust him on the things I'm better informed about. How do you know which is which? I walk the fields, he said, every spring, every autumn. I read what he reports, and I look at what is actually there, and I note the difference. She looked at the south field. She looked at him. You're describing the same method, she said, that you applied to the Whitmore's situation. You hear a report, you verify it, you act on what you actually know rather than what you've been told. He looked at her. Yes, he said, that is the same method. Does it work? The field drainage has been correctly managed for 12 years, he said. The Whitmore's situation is still developing. I'll let you know. She looked at the cold April field and thought about a man who made his decisions the same way, whether he was managing agricultural drainage or a London auction. She thought, that is not a coincidence. She thought, that is a character. The other guests left after 2 weeks. She stayed an additional 4 days, which was the outside limit of what was socially possible, given the party's composition, and which both of them treated with the specific casualness of 2 people who were aware that they were doing something that required care and were being careful. During those 4 days, they walked every morning. They spent the evenings in the library, which was large and well-stocked, and which he had apparently organized himself. Not the way libraries in country houses were typically organized for decorative purposes, but by subject and usage. The books showed signs of actual reading. He had opinions about most of them. She had opinions about all of them. On the 3rd evening, she said, "You are going to have to tell me what you want." Not unkindly, with the directness she had decided, somewhere between London and Derbyshire was the only honest register available to her. He was quiet for a moment. "I want to continue this," he said. "The conversations, the walks. I find that He paused. "I find that I am thinking about things differently when I'm explaining them to you, which is a quality I have not previously encountered in a conversation partner. You think better when you have to explain yourself. I think differently. Whether it's better remains to be established. What does continuing this look like," she said, "given that I'm in London and you'll be in Derbyshire for the summer?" "Letters," he said, "if you're willing." "I'm a precise correspondent," she warned him. "I know," he said, "that's why I'm asking." They wrote for 3 months. His letters were long by any standard, not in the way of letters that use length as performance, but in the way of letters written by someone who has been thinking about something since the last letter and has arrived at the next conversation. He wrote about the Southfield drainage solution and why the factor's proposal had ultimately been correct on one point and incorrect on 2 others. He wrote about a parliamentary debate he had been involved in regarding the Corn Laws, the specifics of the agricultural economics, his own position and the evidence for it, the specific quality of hearing himself argue the wrong side of an issue and having to reconsider. He wrote about his father. Once, briefly, in a long letter about Wymondham Abbey's history, a paragraph that appeared to arrive by accident, as though the letter had been moving forward and had passed through something personal before he managed to redirect it. He wrote, "My father spent the last years of his tenure here working on the tenant reforms and never completing them. I have been completing them for 5 years. I am not certain whether this is respect or recompense." He did not elaborate. He moved on. She wrote back about that paragraph specifically. She wrote about her own father, not the grief which she had managed and set down, but the specific quality of his mind, the way he had thought about problems, the question of whether you could love someone's way of thinking and be less certain about their way of living. She wrote about her brother and what it meant to have someone responsible for your situation who was not equal to the responsibility. She wrote about what she wanted, which she had not previously put into words clearly. She wanted a life in which her own intelligence was a resource rather than a difficulty. His reply to that letter was the shortest he sent. It said, "I want that too, for you. And I am increasingly certain that I want to be part of how it is built." She read it 3 times. She wrote back, "I think I want that too. Tell me when you're coming to London." The social consequences of the Whitmore's auction had not in fact disappeared by June. They had simply gone underground. The drawing rooms had moved on to other subjects, Hartley had been publicly quiet, and the social world had absorbed the story into its general inventory of interesting things that had happened this season. What the social world had not done was forget. And Hartley, who was a man of a particular kind of pride, had been waiting for the moment when Wyndham's attention might be elsewhere and the social balance might shift back towards something he could use. The moment he chose was a Tuesday evening at Lady Cathcart's ball. Nora was there. Edmund was not. He was still in Derbyshire, due in London the following week. She was there with Lady Pembridge and 2 friends, and the evening had been unremarkable until approximately 10 o'clock, when Lord Hartley appeared at her elbow during a gap in the dancing. He was sociable. He was warm. He was, she understood immediately, performing warmth for the benefit of the people around them. "Miss Ashfield," he said, "I hope you'll allow me to say that the spring has treated you well." She looked at him with the specific expression of a woman who knows exactly what a man is doing and is deciding how to respond to it. "Lord Hartley," she said. "I've been hoping for the opportunity to speak with you," he said. "There's a matter I've been meaning to address. The unfortunate business at Whitmore's in March. I want to say, as the person most responsible for the evening, that I'm aware it caused you social discomfort and that it was not my intention." "Lord Hartley," she said, to suggest that any of the young ladies named in the Lord Hartley. He stopped. She said, I am not going to receive an apology from you for two reasons. The first is that an apology at Lady Cathcart's ball, delivered in the presence of 12 witnesses, is not an apology. It is social repair, designed to benefit the person delivering it. The second is that what happened at Whitmore's was not something that can be repaired by an apology because it was not a misunderstanding. You knew what you were doing, you did it deliberately, and I think we should both proceed on that basis. Hartley's warmth dissolved. What was underneath it was something colder and more accurate. You're very sure of your position, he said. Yes, she said, I am. Wyndham won't always be available to... I am not relying on Wyndham, she said. I am relying on myself. Good evening, Lord Hartley. She turned and walked back toward Lady Pembridge. She was aware that she was shaking slightly, not with fear, with the specific physical cost of having said a precise true thing to a powerful man in a room full of witnesses. She was also aware that it was the right thing to have said. She wrote to Edmund that night. She told him what had happened and what she had said. She did not ask for anything. She simply told him because she had found, over 3 months of letters, that he was the person she wanted to tell. His reply arrived in 2 days. It said, I am coming to London on Monday rather than Thursday. And the Hartley matter is handled. And you said exactly the right thing. And I think you already knew that. She wrote back, What have you done about Hartley? He wrote back, Nothing that will be visible. But he will not create further difficulties. She sat with the letter and thought about the invisible methods. The private letter. The managed brother. The 500 guineas that had ended an auction he hadn't attended. She thought about a man who solved problems in the quietest available way and left her the credit for the visible parts. She thought, I am going to marry him. She thought, I should probably tell him. In Regency, England, a formal declaration of courtship and a subsequent proposal were two distinct social events, each with their own rituals and expectations. A man who had been paying particular attention to a woman was understood by society to be in the first phase. The proposal was the transition to the second, legally significant phase. The woman's acceptance was, formally, the end of her social independence. She passed from the management of her guardian to the management of her husband. For a woman like Nora, who had been managing her own situation throughout, this was not a transition to be taken lightly or to be allowed to happen to her rather than with her. He arrived on a Monday, as he said he would. He called on Lady Pembridge's house that afternoon. Lady Pembridge received him, served tea, made herself present for the correct duration of time, and then removed herself with the specific efficiency of a woman who had been managing social situations for 40 years and knew when to be absent. They sat in Lady Pembridge's morning room. The July afternoon was warm through the windows. She had been in this room since March. It was the room where she had heard about the auction, where Lady Pembridge had said, You will never guess what Wyndham has done. You said the Hartley matter was handled, she said. What did you do? I spoke with 2 men who are in a position to significantly inconvenience Hartley if he creates further difficulties, he said, and I communicated clearly that their willingness to remain uninvolved in his affairs depends on his behavior toward you. You used leverage. I used information I had about his financial situation and his relationships, he said. Yes. Where did you get the information? I researched it when I researched Whitmore's situation, he said. I kept it because I thought it might be useful. It was. She considered this. You collected information on Hartley, she said, in March on the basis of a thing you heard through a wall at a club, and you kept it for 3 months in case it was needed. Yes. That is very thorough. I am thorough about things I care about, he said. The morning room. The July light. The tea is getting cold. I told him I wasn't relying on you, she said. I know, you wrote it to me. You were entirely right. And yet, you didn't need me for the Hartley conversation, he said. You handled that. What I did was a subsequent and separate action. The social landscape is different now because of what you said to him, and because of what I arranged afterward. Both things are true simultaneously. You're very careful about that, she said. About making sure I have the credit. You have the credit because you did the work, he said. I adjusted some of the background conditions. That's not the same thing. She looked at him. The man who had made the bid through a note managed her brother in a meeting that redirected the conversation back to her, collected and deployed information on Hartley without appearing to do it at all. Edmund, she said. It was the first time she had used his given name. She had been aware of not using it, and then she had used it without deciding to, which meant it was time. Nora, he said. I've been thinking about what I want, she said, and what I want is to marry someone whose intelligence I respect, whose methods I can follow, and whose decisions I can understand. Someone who will not attempt to manage my situation except in the ways I request and sanction. That is a very precise set of requirements, he said. I am precise about things I care about, she said. I believe you understand that. He was quiet for a moment. Are you proposing to me? He said. I am telling you what I want, she said, and asking if it matches what you want. You've described your intentions obliquely in letters for 3 months. I find I'm no longer interested in the oblique. It matches, he said. Exactly. Then yes, she said, I am proposing to you. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, This is the second time you've managed the situation more directly than I anticipated. What was the first? Coming to Lady Morwell's drawing room and asking why, he said, most people would have waited to see what I did next. Most people don't have 3 months of the London season left to manage, she said. He smiled. It was the real smile, the specific one she had only seen twice before, brief and real and belonging to him. Yes, he said, I will marry you. Gladly. And on the terms you've described. The formal announcement of an engagement in Regency, England, was a social event with significant public consequences. It would appear in the Morning Post. It would be received at every drawing room in London within 24 hours. It would be commented upon, interpreted, and discussed with the specific energy that society applied to any significant social development. For an engagement that had its origins in the Whitmore's auction, the public announcement carried an additional dimension. It was the social world's final statement on the matter. The question of how it would be framed, whose narrative would govern the public understanding of the engagement, was therefore not trivial. The question of the announcement was one they discussed carefully. The obvious version, which would circulate whether they crafted it or not, was Whitmore's story in which a duke had bid 500 guineas at a gentleman's club auction and then married the woman he'd bid on. This version was entertaining, somewhat romanticized, and almost entirely missed the point of everything that had happened. It also gave Hartley and his set a degree of narrative centrality that she found objectionable. I don't want the announcement to be about Whitmore's, she said. Neither do I, he said. The engagement can stand on its own, without the auction as its origin story. People will make the connection regardless. People will make the connection, he agreed, but they'll make it privately, and it won't be in the formal public record. The announcement can simply be the announcement. She thought about this. What about the men at Whitmore's, she said. Hartley's set. They will know the announcement confirms the bid's success in their terms. Let them know it, he said. They were attempting to humiliate you. What they'll see in the announcement is that it didn't work. I don't consider that a problem. She considered this framing, the announcement as the quiet final word on an attempt that had not succeeded. Not triumphant, simply accurate. All right, she said. The announcement appeared in the Morning Post on Thursday. It was brief, factual, and entirely without the romantic elaboration that social announcements typically contained. It said that the engagement of Miss Nora Ashfield and His Grace Edmund Roe, Duke of Windham, had been announced. Nothing more. Lady Pembridge said it was the most dignified announcement she had read in 20 years. Lord Hartley said nothing. He had apparently nothing to say. Her brother came to London that week, having read the announcement in the Post, with what he described to her as complete surprise, though she strongly suspected he had received advance notice from Lady Pembridge. Oliver was, in this instance, more useful than he had been in April. He was genuinely pleased. The match was, by every social and financial measure, the best possible outcome from a situation he had mismanaged with good intentions. He said so, clumsily and earnestly, and she accepted it without requiring him to say it better. She also told him, clearly and without ambiguity, that the way the engagement had been managed, and specifically the fact that Edmund had explicitly declined to negotiate with Oliver directly and had returned the conversation to her, was both correct and how she intended her affairs to be managed going forward. Oliver looked slightly chastened and said, "He told me as much in April?" "Yes," she said, "I know. The period between a formal engagement and the wedding in Regency, England, typically lasted 3 to 6 months, long enough for the social and legal formalities to be completed, for the settlement negotiations to conclude, and for the household arrangements to be established. During this period, the engaged couple were permitted considerably more social latitude than unengaged persons. They could walk together unchaperoned in certain contexts, exchange letters freely, and meet privately to some degree. This period was, in practice, often the most honest and revealing period of the relationship, the time when the managed social performance of courtship gave way to the more unguarded reality of two people learning who they were going to spend their lives with. She told him about her father, not the version in the letters, the full version. She told him about the specific quality of her father's mind, which had been the most interesting mind she had known, and which had been pointed at small parish concerns and the management of a household that was slightly too large for the income available to manage it. She told him about what it had meant to grow up in that specific combination: intellectual richness and financial precarity, the sense that the world contained more possibilities than were available from where she was standing. She told him about the 2 London seasons before this one, during which she had been doing the same things every eligible woman was doing and finding them progressively more airless. She told him about the specific version of invisibility that was experienced by a woman considered clever, not the invisibility of being overlooked, but the visibility of being a problem to be managed, someone's intelligence categorized as a social difficulty that reduced their value. She told him all of this in the library at Wyndham Abbey, in August, in the long evenings of the second visit. He listened with the full attention he gave to things he considered important. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Yes." "The 500 guineas, he said. "I told you it was not a romantic gesture." That was accurate. It was not entirely the simple moral statement I described it as. She looked at him. "I had researched you," he said, "before Whitmore's, before I heard anything through the wall." She was very still. "There is a parliamentary committee," he said, "that I chair regarding the reform of women's property law. We've been compiling evidence about the specific social and economic conditions that make women vulnerable to the kind of situation you are in. The precarious financial position, the inadequate guardian, the social mechanisms that exploit that vulnerability. Your situation was known to me from the committee's work as an example of precisely the conditions we've been discussing." "I was a case study," she said. "You were an example of a pattern," he said carefully. "I knew your circumstances." "Not you. I had not met you. I know your circumstances." "And when you heard the auction?" "The auction was not surprising," he said, "given what I knew of Hartley's involvement in similar situations previously. What I did was the most efficient thing I could do with the information and the resources I had." She was quiet. "For a long time. You've been working on this problem for longer than March," she said. "The committee work began 18 months ago, and Hartley is one of the examples. Hartley and his set have been creating situations of this kind systematically for several years," he said. "The committee has been documenting it. What I did at Whitmore's was specific to you because you were there and the moment required action. But the Hartley situation is larger than one auction. Please, if are enjoying this story so far, please subscribe to this channel and like the story to reach others." She absorbed this. She thought about all of it: the researched circumstances, the committee, the documentation, the specific way a man who solved problems quietly had been working on the biggest version of this problem for 18 months before she knew he existed. "What does the committee intend to do with the evidence?" "Present it to Parliament," he said. "Argue for reform of the property laws and the legal mechanisms that make this kind of exploitation possible." "Will it succeed?" "I don't know," he said. "It will take time. It may take several attempts. But the documentation is thorough and the arguments are sound." She looked at him. "Can I read the committee's work?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "There are 400 pages," he said. I read the empirical philosophy text in 3 days, she said. I know, he said, and then, I was hoping you'd ask. The parliamentary campaign for women's property law reform in Regency, England, was a long and difficult one. The Married Women's Property Act would not be passed until 1882, 65 years after this story is set. The men and women who worked on this reform in the early 19th century did so with full knowledge that they were unlikely to see it completed in their lifetimes. The work was not dramatic or publicly celebrated. It was the accumulation of documentation, the building of arguments, the slow persuasion of institutions. It is the kind of work that is easy to overlook in historical accounts, because it does not produce a single moment of triumph. It produces an eventual change, arrived at by accretion, invisible in any individual year. She had read 400 pages in 6 days. She had 43 pages of notes. She gave him the notes on a Tuesday morning in November, in the London house that was now hers as well as his, at the breakfast table where they had established the habit of an hour of working conversation before the day's obligations divided them. He took the notes and read the first page with the full attention she had come to depend on. He read for 10 minutes. She drank her tea. You found 3 gaps in the third section's argument, he said. The third section assumes that the legal mechanism and the social mechanism are separate, she said. They're not. The social enforcement is what makes the legal structure effective. You need to document both. The committee doesn't have evidence on the social enforcement mechanisms, he said. I know, she said. I have 6 years of living inside them. I can supply it. He looked at her. You want to contribute evidence to the committee. I want to contribute to the work, she said. I understand you may have concerns about the appropriateness of... I have no concerns, he said. I have been waiting since August for you to say this. You've been waiting. You read 400 pages in 6 days and took 43 pages of notes, he said. I was going to give you until December. She looked at the notes. She looked at him. There is one condition, she said. Name it. My contribution is credited, she said. Not to you, not to the Duke of Wyndham's household, not anonymously. To me, by name. The work is mine. The attribution is mine. He was quiet for one moment. Yes, he said. Obviously. She picked up her tea. Good, she said. Then we have a great deal to do. Outside the EOS London house, November was being November, grey and cold and entirely committed to itself. Inside, at the breakfast table, the 400 pages and 43 pages of notes and a fresh blank book for the next section were arranged with the specific order of 2 people who had decided to build something together and had started. She thought, not for the first time, about the Thursday morning in March when Lady Pembridge had said, You will never guess what Wyndham has done. She thought, I could not have guessed. She thought, I would not have known to. She thought, that is, in the end, what made it remarkable. Not the 500 guineas, not the private letter, not the invisible management of 100 social complications. What made it remarkable was that the same man who had been working on the problem for 18 months was also willing, without requiring any persuasion, to give her the work itself. She looked at him across the breakfast table with the documents between them. Edmund, she said, Nora. You were working on this problem before you knew I existed. Yes. And then I became part of the problem. You became part of the evidence, he said, yes. And now I'm part of the solution. Now you're part of the solution, he said, which is considerably more interesting. She opened the blank book. She began to write. The auction at Whitmore's is fictional. The world that made it possible is not. In Regency England, women's legal and social position was defined almost entirely by their relationship to men. An unmarried woman existed, legally, as a dependent of her father or guardian. A married woman existed legally as a dependent of her husband. Under the doctrine of coverture, she had no independent legal existence. She could not own property, enter contracts, or take legal action. Everything she had became her husband's upon marriage. The men who attended the fictional Whitmore's auction were doing, in an explicit and vulgar form, what the entire social season was already doing implicitly, calculating the value of women as marriage prospects and discussing which ones represented the best strategic investments. The auction was not a departure from the social system. It was the social system made briefly honest about itself. The parliamentary committee Edmund chairs working on property law reform, documenting the social and economic mechanisms that make women vulnerable, arguing for legal change, is based on the actual work that men and women undertook in the early 19th century to reform the conditions that this story depicts. The Married Women's Property Act of 1882 was the eventual result of this work. It came 65 years after this story is set. The people who began the work in the 1810s and 1820s knew they would not see it completed. They did the work anyway. Nora Ashfield is fictional. The women whose circumstances she represents are not. They were the evidence that the committees documented, the case studies in the reform arguments, the women who lived inside the social and legal mechanisms that this story describes. They could not, in most cases, become part of the solution. They were too occupied with surviving the problem. What this story imagines is the specific, limited, particular case in which one of them could. Not because of the 500 guineas, though the 500 guineas is what stopped the auction. Because of a man who, when he had given her access to the work, said obviously, and meant it. The work of the committee was real. The attribution was not yet possible in most cases. Nora Ashfield's insistence that her contribution be credited by name is the story's most anachronistic element. It is also, I would argue, its most important one. The women who did this work deserve to have their names on it. Most of them never did. This one does. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel and like the story. Tell me where you are listening from. And if you know someone who has been part of a solution that other people got the credit for, share this with them.